6:42 in Trinidad and Tobago, trying to get a better sense of this entire situation involving Petrotrin, new companies announced by the government, legal action underway, matters being resolved, injunctions being granted, then being defeated in the courts, appeal court on Thursday, industrial court to get involved again. But with David Abdulah, the leader of the MSJ, and indeed a long-time member of the OWTU and very much part of the labor movement, hence the arrival of the MSJ into the politics in Trinidad and Tobago, giving us a perspective on this situation. We also have the context of Mr. Espine, the chairman of Petrotrin, talking about issues of bankruptcy when the matter of the injunction being granted by the industrial court, comments about the relevance of the industrial court. We've had also the Chamber of Commerce commenting on it as well, referencing different statements made, and I think they alluded as well to Ansel Roger's comment about take your platform and go, in that sense. We also had a prominent businessman, I think it was last year, making similar statements about the industrial court. Are those comments valid, David Abdulah?
Well, all right, and let me just deal with, first of all, the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
You dealt with several things. You know, that thing about bankruptcy stated by Mr. Espine, and then all kinds of commentators got involved and said, well, yes, under the Severance and Benefits Act, workers' severance pay is the last on the rung of payments to be made, and they cited ArcelorMittal when workers didn't get any severance pay and so on and so on. And that was really to create a climate of fear, and it was bullying, you know. In fact, it was bullying to get workers to sign on or to accept their packages, so-called packages. And let me also say that those packages, and there is no added factor to the packages other than what is legally required under the collective agreement signed, or various collective agreements between the union and the employer. So, you know, I think you heard at one time the Prime Minister said we're going to give, you know, very generous packages, and, you know, people may be getting land and all kind of statements. Nothing like that, you know. It is straight up according to the collective agreement that was negotiated for the workers by the union. So I want to make that absolutely clear. There's nothing added to those packages. But that bankruptcy thing was to create a climate of fear. It's a part of the shock and awe strategy and so on. Now, what I'm noticing, and I was saying that to a colleague yesterday, is that in the 1980s, during the period of structural adjustment, a lot of workers lost their jobs and so on. There was this major push by the employer class in this country to weaken trade unions, to get collective agreements out of the way, to get cost of living. I remember that was a major thing, to get cost of living out of collective agreements. And there was a real push. At the end of that period of structural adjustment, when the economy began to grow again, what you saw happening is that the income inequality in the country expanded exponentially. So the wealth of those at the top became that much more obscene in terms of wealth and so on. People being able to own 2 and 3 Porsche motor cars, as I saw in a yard in West Moorings the other day and so on. And at the other end, large numbers of people who are working poor, people who are working for minimum wage, who could barely get by from paycheck to paycheck, from week to week to month and so on, who are not being able to provide decent shelter, proper nutrition for themselves and their families and so on. And so we have created a type of society where there's this huge gap. In fact, it was alluded to in that famous Anthony Bourdain,
yes,
by one of the persons, Mr. Peter George Sr., who said, you know, we're losing the middle class.
Which is the buffer between the very, very wealthy and the very, very poor.
Right. And what has happened is that that was actually a true statement in the sense that we are losing the middle class because, take for example, the Petrotrin workers, who are workers but are part of the middle income earners in the country, if you wish to put it that way.
Yes.
And we're losing them. We lost ArcelorMittal. They were part of the middle income earners. So what is happening is that we are creating more and more people at the lower end of the income scale and so on, who are catching their tails and so on to survive. And we're creating a smaller and smaller group of people at the very top who have obscene wealth and affluence in the country. Now, what the Chamber of Commerce is seeking to do, and the culture of the old plantation, that old plantation culture, which never really went away, yes, those old plantation culture type owners of big business and so on, and transnational companies are saying, we don't want trade unions and so on. It's not peculiar to Trinidad and Tobago. It's happening in Europe, it's happened in the United States, and so on. Trump is trying to do that with the Supreme Court. With the shift in the power of the Supreme Court, is going to decimate workers' rights in the United States. It's no different. And so we have this assault on trade unions, assault on the industrial court. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce made some statements that were just not true. They said, for example, that the ArcelorMittal judgment implied that it caused ArcelorMittal to close up and go. That wasn't true. The ArcelorMittal judgment was really a Privy Council judgment which upheld workers' rights. Now, it's either we want to have people with rights or we don't want to have people with rights in this country. Do we want a society where we have the absolute abuse of power by the state, whoever's in government, doesn't matter who is PNM or UNC and so on, but abuse of power by the state, of abuse of power by the economic elites, because we do have an economic class of elites in this country.
But David Abdulah, if you're saying that there's the economic elites who enjoy the maintenance of the plantation model, what about the unions who are accused of being locked into that old 1930s, 1940s style of confrontation and obfuscation and basically sticking to the old ways in an entirely new environment?
And you know, the unions have made steps forward, you know. Take, for example, the tripartite. Unions were quite prepared to go into the tripartite process. Even the Petrotrin negotiations last year, where the employer and the union agreed to an interim settlement of 5% for 2011 to 2014, the union said, we're not going to take back pay. And said to the workers, no, you can't push for back pay because that back pay, the company can't afford to pay the back pay now. So what we will do is work as workers, the union and the employer, to try and improve production, improve productivity, so that earnings will increase. And when earnings are increased enough to pay the back pay, that is when the back pay will be paid. Now, nobody speaks about that. Now, that is a very progressive way of addressing matters. That's a way of compromising and so on, of trying to work with the employer to improve the company, and by extension, then workers would then benefit, but not workers benefit first at the expense of the company. But the Chamber doesn't speak about that, even though that is public record and so on. And the tripartite process was badly handled by the government, because I know as a member of the Economic Development Advisory Board, we put forward a note to the Prime Minister on how the tripartite process should function. And essentially what we said is that after the Minister of Finance lays out his understanding of the country's economy, and this was early 2016, just months after the government came in, then Business and Labour should lay out how they saw the economy, and then everybody should say, what are we prepared to do to improve productivity, to increase foreign exchange earnings or reduce our consumption of foreign exchange, to address the government's fiscal deficit and so on, and to secure decent jobs. Those were the things, so that if that process had gone the way the EDAB had recommended, there would have been a serious discussion on what are the relative sacrifices and contributions that different sectors of the country have to make to get the country to move forward. And the unions were prepared to engage in that. The government failed to pursue the process in that way, and of course the employers weren't interested in that, and that was the end of Solomon Grundy.
Is it a case of never the twain shall meet, that in the Trinidad and Tobago of today, because of our history, the business interest will always trump the union perspective, because business has always been the ones who determine who runs the country?
Yes, if we continue to have the kind of political leadership that we have and have had in the past. Because you see, in that process, the government, well, let's say the state as an institution, has a responsibility to ensure that there is balance and equity and fairness in the society. Now, by equity, we're not saying everybody's going to get the same pay, because that's not on. Unions don't argue for that. So that in a collective agreement, some people get paid more than others according to the nature of the job and the contribution and so on. We have collective agreements, ODT has collective agreements in some companies which are vastly superior to other companies, because a small manufacturing company can't pay the same as another type of company. So unions don't suggest that everybody must get everything the same, but there must be equity, there must be fairness and so on. And that is the role of the state. And in the preamble to the Constitution, it says that we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, affirm our belief in the principles of social justice, all right? That that the resources, material resources, should subserve the common good, not the good of a few, the common good, that labor should not be exploited or forced to work in inhumane circumstances, that advancement should be on the basis of merit and integrity. That's what we affirm too. But that is not what successive governments do in terms of managing not only the resources, but managing the relationship between capital and labor.
But do we have a model? We have just a few minutes left, and if we appear to be diverting from the specifics of the Petrotrin issues to try to get a sense, because some people might be arguing, David Abdulah, what you all are arguing is really don't exist in the world. You're nowhere in the world in a nominally free society, unless it's a controlled economy or a controlled society, where there is that maybe not harmonious, but labor and business are actually willing to work together for the good of the country. Does that actually exist?
I think, I don't like models, but I think in a number of the Scandinavian countries, you do find that kind of relationship. You have, at workplaces, you have works councils, there's a management worker type of collaboration, there's a tripartite process, and those countries have very high quality of education, a high standard of living, huge savings in case of Norway in their Heritage and Stabilization Fund, the equivalent of that, and so on and so on. So there are examples where those things can work. Of course, we are a different kind of society because we are much more diverse than those countries are, and therefore we have to manage our diversity in that regard. But that is where political, enlightened, strong political leadership comes in. Now, strong political leadership is not about saying we're going to close down Petrotrin. That's the kind of badge on political leadership that we have now. Close down Petrotrin, send the workers home, because what that does is to affirm a model of development where there's going to be greater inequality, social injustice, and strengthening that neoliberal economic model where capital prevails. And at the end of the day, we are going to see that emerge. We're going to see who is going to buy the refinery. We're going to see who is going to buy into E&P. And you're going to see transnational capital or the Chinese or somebody else coming in to do that, because that is the way in which the current political leadership thinks about the development of the society.
But very quickly, because we only have a couple of minutes, what you are advocating, what the MSJ might be advocating, has not been able to get support. You might talk about being on the ground and people, sounding, that we need to move away, but still they will tell you that, and then when they go to the ballot box, they vote PNM or UNC, and again you will lose your deposit.
Yeah, because of the, yes, as we have had in local government elections previously. And that's because the politics, as we've talked about this many times, is race-based, is based on ethnicity. But with this Petrotrin issue and the debate about what I'm trying to shift the debates, not to diminish the significance of what is happening at Petrotrin, because we can't, but it is really an issue, I think, that raises now the ideological or philosophical issues about what kind of Trinidad and Tobago do we wish to have. And to understand that there is a huge push of an agenda by the owners and managers of big capital in this country, supported by the politicians, to create a Trinidad and Tobago, which is where life is going to be even nastier, more brutish and shorter.
But very quickly, why would a sensible businessman want that? The reason I said, wouldn't that mean that he has to build higher walls, has to be more frightened for his children? Why would any sensible business person, who, let's say, only interested in profits, why would he or she want that?
Philosophically, they work it out and figure, well, if we could get close to full employment with people working in security jobs or in fast foods and in malls and low-paid, low-skilled jobs and so on, that somehow or the other that could be managed. It's happened elsewhere in the world, and some of the richest people in the world, including people like Bill Gates and that big investor in the United States, Warren Buffett,
yes,
have been saying that inequality of incomes within countries and between countries is the greatest threat to human development.
But they're saying that now after they have benefited from it, so
yes,
isn't it hypocritical of them?
It is to some extent hypocritical, but they also are saying, and I've heard them say that they feel that they have to pay more taxes in order to ensure that human development is more equitable for others in the society, so people could get an opportunity to advance and so on. And so even belatedly, they may be making that point, but they understand, you're making the point that some people think that they could get away with it. They recognize from their position of power and wealth that ultimately that model can't work. our business people are very short-sighted. They bank their money abroad, capital flight, and they figure they could leave Trinidad and Tobago if push comes to shove and live elsewhere.
David Abdulah, thank you very much as always for your perspective. There are many, many different issues tied into this Petrotrin matter, as it has been tied into many similar type situations in Trinidad and Tobago over the decades. Are we getting any closer to better understanding the realities of it, depending on who you believe and what is right? Well, I don't know, but at least we're trying to have the conversation continuing in that regard. The news coming up, then we move into the second hour of Morning Edition.